Well, Dr. Charles Murray is a political scientist, he is an author, and he's a libertarian. And there are two books that some of the faculty members in this group have come into contact with these last 2 years. One is the Little Values in Capitalism short book called American Exceptionalism, and the other is a book that all of you have received and had a chance to take a look at in advance of this conference called The Curmudgeon's Guide, advice for getting ahead. And so Dr. Charles Murray also wrote a bestseller in 2012 called Coming Apart that has affected the conversation in the country in substantial ways, and I hope we'll hear some wisdom from him that touch on a couple of these different books. Dr. Murray first came to national attention in 1984 with the publication of Losing Ground, which has been credited as giving a real intellectual foundation for welfare reform in 1996. He also wrote the 1994 bestseller, The Bell Curve, with the late Richard Herdenstein, which sparked heated controversy for its analysis on the role of IQ in shaping America's class structure. Other books from Dr. Murray include What It Means to Be a Libertarian, Human Accomplishment, In Our Hands, and Real Education. And it's a real honor to have really one of the most clarion voices that distinguish AEI with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Charles Murray.
Thank you very much. I see a lot of you have just gone through the line, and you should not hesitate to continue eating. I'm used to that, and I can put up with the clatter of cups and plates, and the rest of it won't bother me a bit. I want to start by getting a sense of this group. Now, the faculty, don't raise your hands. I'm just trying to get students here. If you have grown up in what you'd call a middle class, upper middle class, suburban environment or urban environment, would you raise your hands? Whoa. If you've grown up in what you would call either a more rural or a small town, a small city environment, would you please raise your hands? Okay, good. You are not, there's not as much of small town America and rural America in this group as I probably would have predicted. It also means that my remarks tonight are going to be more relevant than they would have been if that group had been more highly represented. Because I'm going to talk about two related problems. One of them has to do with the nature of the new upper class that I describe in Coming Apart, of which you are all prospective members, or already are members through your parents, one of the two, or a great many of you are. And the second is the implications that this has for how you spend the next 5 or 10 years of your life, which picks up from things that are in Curmudgeon's Guide. And if you have assiduously already read Curmudgeon's Guide, then this will be repetitious, but I bet a lot of you have not yet. I actually thought you were going to get the book after the conference, but I've now learned differently. Let me start with the issues of the new upper class. The point that I try to make in Coming Apart is that the people who run the country are constituted differently from the people who've run the country in previous generations in a couple of different ways. But the main ones are that you are the product of now more than half a century of extremely efficient identification of the brightest kids in the country and extremely efficient methods for shipping them off to good colleges and giving them good educations. Not just undergraduate educations, but also then sending them to graduate schools and the rest. You are also moving into an economy which for the last century has had a steady rise in the economic value of brains. Being smart today has a whole lot more income-producing potential all by itself than it did 100 years ago. I mean, this is most obvious in the case of the information technology revolution. I'm sure that on every one of your campuses you have a few of your fellow students you know who are really sensational in programming or in math or in some of those other disciplines. They're fantastic at it, and they have absolutely zero social skills whatsoever. Okay, 100 years ago, there weren't very many jobs they could fill, and the jobs they could fill didn't pay very much money. And now they will graduate from your schools, and if they're really, really good at it, Google and Microsoft and Apple will be competing with them with large salaries. And if they are really terrific pure mathematicians, they can be promised wealth beyond the wildest dreams of avarice by the quantitative hedge funds in New York City. But the same thing has happened throughout the economy. And since I suspect the average IQ in this room is pretty high, this is very good news for all of you. The downside of all this is that a new kind of culture has been created. You have now an elite which is bound together not by socioeconomic status per se, but also bound together by their socialization on the campus and by their socialization after leaving the campus, where they live in communities filled with people very much like them. In Coming Apart, I have a quiz for assessing the degree to which you are encapsulated in the new upper class bubble. It's called How Thick is Your Bubble? 25 questions. You can get a maximum of 100 points. And in some respects, the scores of this group are likely to be pretty good. For example, one of the questions is, have you ever had as a close friend a person who self-identifies as an evangelical Christian? You all get to check that box with no problem whatsoever. There are other questions, however, that maybe you wouldn't get such high scores on. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Have you ever lived in a neighborhood for at least a year in which at least half of your neighbors did not have college degrees? Have you ever lived for at least a year with your family having an income below the poverty line? Other questions are things like, have you or your spouse ever purchased a pickup truck? Or a question such as, in the past year, have you or your spouse stocked your refrigerator with a mass market domestic beer? The reason for that question is, which by the way does not apply to college students, but the reason for that question is the new upper class has very distinctive tastes in food and drink. And so with wine, they can talk endlessly about wine and the right kind of Roquefort cheese, and foodies are an actual subgroup of this. But when it comes to beer, Coors and Miller Lite and Budweiser, they shy away in horror. If their beer has not been crafted by Belgian elves, they won't drink it. So you have these questions, but there are a few others that are, I think, deeply important. For example, have you ever held a job that caused a body part to hurt at the end of the day? Because if you have not held a job that caused a body part to hurt at the end of the day, it's virtually impossible for you to empathize with the very large proportion of the American population who have those kinds of jobs every day. And in some important sense, you don't know what work is. What's happened by you, obviously, I'm not saying you specifically, I'm saying sort of this whole class of people who increasingly are second and third generation. So the people who ran the country in 1950 were wealthy and successful, but almost all of them had started out in working class or middle class homes. If you take the cabinet of Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, or for that matter, if you take the cabinet of John Kennedy in 1960, there were a couple of Northeastern blue bloods in both of those cabinets of old money and that sort of thing who'd gone to Yale and Princeton. But most of them were the sons, and in a couple of cases daughters, of peddlers, of farmers, in some cases tenant farmers, of factory workers and things like that. If you go to the cabinets of Barack Obama or of George W. Bush or Bill Clinton, any of the last cabinets for the last 20 years, you find a much higher proportion who are in the second or third generation of this upper middle class. They have gone to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and Stanford, and places like that for graduate school, if not undergraduate, and they have always been in the upper middle class. That's dangerous. That's a problem. Because the people who run the country, and I'm not just talking about politicians, I'm talking about people who run the economy, I'm talking about people who run the culture, people who write sitcoms and other dramas, and who journalists who decide what's on the evening news. to the extent that they are completely unable to empathize with what a truck driver's life is like, or for that matter, what an insurance agent's life is like, they are going to make really bad mistakes. And they're also going to tend to be quite condescending. I think Mayor Bloomberg of New York is a classic example of that, with his now notorious attempt to outlaw great big cups of soft drinks, because he knows better. And I think that there is, for people who have been encased in the upper middle class bubble, there is an assumption that the great mass of the population out there really does stupid things and needs help in being nudged in the right directions. An assumption which would quickly be disabused if people actually lived in the great mass of America. And that brings me to the question of what you ought to be doing with your next 5 or 10 years. It may coincide with some of the advice you got in the last session about career planning, and some of it may not. First thing, a lot of you are still undergraduates, right? You may have another summer or two left before you graduate from college. Do not get an internship at AEI or at Brookings or at the Museum of Modern Art or anywhere else. Internships are affirmative action for the privileged, and you're just going to be hanging out with a whole bunch of people just like the people you've already known all your life. Instead, go out and get a job waiting tables in Glacier National Park, or helping kids put worms on hooks at a fishing camp in Maine, or any other kind of job where you aren't going to be hanging out with the same kind of people you always hang out with. It's a real job, which is to say, unlike an internship, you can get fired from a real job, and you are actually expected to produce real work. That's going to be a good start for you. But after you've then gotten to the point where you have finished college, here's what you must not do. You must not go directly to graduate school, unless some of you from the age of 6 have known you wanted to be a physician. It is what you were put on earth to do. Maybe some of you have known from age 6 that you love the law. It fascinates you. I'd hate to meet a 6-year-old who actually felt that way, but it's theoretically possible. Okay, go to law school, go to medical school, that's okay. Very few of us at the age of 22 when we graduate from college, or about that age, very few of us already have a sense of this is what I was put on earth to do, where you want to go out and start pursuing that single-mindedly. On the contrary, you have faced a problem that is not often talked about very much. If you grow up in an upper middle class background, in many respects, you are socialized into thinking about as limited a set of occupations as a kid from the inner city. They are a different set of occupations that you've been socialized into thinking about, but it's, you know, the law or medicine or going into graduate school and maybe becoming a faculty member, or maybe to be getting a master's degree in business administration and going into business, but there's not a wide range. And so one of the things you first need to do is to expose yourself in your early 20s to things which will teach you what kinds of itches you need to scratch. Some of us really like being behind the scenes, whether it's inside the tape of a crime scene, or literally backstage at a production, or in the news business where you get passes to the locker rooms or to the back rooms where most people don't get to go. Other people really like being on stage, at center stage. Some people like to, in my business, some people like to write short things and some people like to write long things. I'm proud to say that a good friend of mine is Charles Krauthammer. And Charles and I used to be joint founding members of a club, a chess club that we called the Pariah Chess Club. This was right after the Bell Curve came out, and the Pariah Chess Club seemed like a good name for it. And the thing is that Charles only likes to play really fast chess games with a clock in which you only have a couple of minutes to finish the whole game. I like slow chess games where there's lots of time to think. What does Charles Krauthammer write? He writes 800-word columns. What do I write? On some occasions, I write 870-page books. And there's a consistency here about the scratches that we need to itch. And what I'm pointing out is that what will make you happy in a career is a job which is fun because you're scratching those itches. The example I use in Curmudgeon's Guide to try to break people out of the sort of tunnel vision they have is, suppose you're a person who likes to figure out other people, enjoys interacting with other people, but likes to figure them out. Suppose you also like contest living. You like at the end of the day to have a sense of battles won or lost as opposed to sort of just things going along. What kind of job would be good for you? And I say, well, have you ever thought about going into sales? Because in sales, you have to interact with other people, you have to figure out how they tick, and each day does consist of a series of wins and losses. And of course, for most of you, if I say, well, have you ever thought about going into sales, you think selling houses or cars or something, which doesn't sound like very much fun and would also not make your parents real happy in terms of their ambitions for you. But suppose I said, no, actually, how about selling antiquities or yachts or weapon systems? All of these things are sales jobs that scratch those itches and that also are really fascinating in terms of the subject matter and could make a really interesting career that would never enter your line of sight in the socialization that you ordinarily go through. So that's one of the things you're supposed to do right after you get out of school. A second thing that you better do right after you get out of school, for some of you, is to acquire resilience. Many of you have been the victims of an overly happy childhood. You have had parents who were patient and understanding. You have had teachers who were patient and understanding. And in fact, about all of the adults in your life have been patient and understanding. And you approach adulthood with the resilience of a crystal champagne flute. You are going to be tested sooner or later in a very stressful environment where you're going to have to make decisions, you're going to have to react to problems that will test your resilience. It's a whole lot better to do that when you're 22 and to do not have a spouse and do not have children than to do it when you're 35 and have both, plus a lot of other responsibilities. You need, in that case, to throw yourself into a completely alien environment, because you go to graduate school or you get a job in an ordinary career line, you aren't going to get stressed there either. You're going to be dealing with people and situations that you know how to deal with well because it's part of the world you've grown up in. You've got to find a different world. And in Curmudgeon's Guide, I give you two choices. One is join the military. There are not very many things. I'm a very lucky man. There are very few things that I regret at this point in my life not having done. Never having gone into the military is one of them. I think that would have been an experience that in some sense has left a hole in my life by not doing it. Of course, had I done it, it was during the middle of the Vietnam War, so my life might have gone on very long. But if we take a happier assumption about it, I think it would have been an important thing for me to do. But I guarantee you this, if you have been serving active duty a couple of years in the military, you will have acquired resilience. You will have also been thrown into an environment where you deal with all kinds of people, and you will come out of it a much more mature person than you were when you went in. My wife formerly taught at Rutgers, English literature. And Rutgers was a school which had a lot of students who came directly from good high schools in New Jersey and other parts of the Northeast. But it also was a school that had a lot of people who'd been out of school for several years or never gone to college. They'd been in the military, and they came back. And she's teaching English literature. Which makes her remark especially interesting, because she would get some of these returning veterans in her English literature class, teaching 19th century English fiction. And she would simply say the degree to which they were focused, the degree to which they knew what they wanted out of the course was just incomparably greater than that of the freshmen and sophomores who'd come directly from high school. And also, as she points out, Henry James wasn't writing for 19-year-olds. You want to understand Henry James or Tolstoy or the rest of it, having a few more years under your belt and some life experience under your belt is a pretty good thing to do. So that's one way to do it. The route I took is another alternative. You graduate from college, you buy a one-way airplane ticket to a city that's exotic and alien. London and Paris do not qualify as exotic and alien. You do not have that option. It's got to be Addis Ababa or Karachi or, as in my case, Bangkok. And take your one-way airplane ticket, a couple of $1,000s to tide you over until you get your feet in the ground, get off the plane, go find a job, live there for 2 or 3 years. That will also stress you. Don't go backpacking. You go backpacking, it's just going to be more of the same stuff. You know, it's the same people in this room, except they'll be grungier and they'll have backpacks on. And no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about getting a job and learning to live in an alien culture, having learned the language, but even more importantly, having learned the social cues. I cannot tell you how much fun that is. In Thailand, after I was there for 3, 4, 5 years, to be fluent in the language, to know exactly what's going on in the street scene as you're walking along, is just a really, talk about a confidence-building experience. It is a confidence-building experience in your ability to master an alien environment that transfers throughout the rest of your life. So you don't go directly to graduate school. You don't go directly into a job. You do something like that for the first part of your 20s. Now, at this point, you're all saying, no, some of you are saying to yourselves, but I'm going to fall so far behind. So here's the next thing you have to do. Recalibrate your perspective on time. When I was very ambitious when I was in college. I wanted to be president of the United States, like probably half of the people in this room do. And I even thought there was a chance that I might be. That's how ambitious I was. But I also thought that I ought to be a big success by the time I was in my late 20s and be climbing to the top by my late 30s. And I wasn't even sure I'd be alive by my 50s. That was an understandable way to think about time because I remember I was growing up at a point when you had a president just been elected in 1960 who was only 42 years old, and his brother Robert Kennedy was Attorney General at the age of, I think, 36. So I had some role models that were telling me that was possible. But here's the reality. Any career you go into involves an apprenticeship, if it's a career worthy of the name. An apprenticeship in which it will take you some years to get really good at your craft. You will master that apprenticeship. You will become really good at your craft by your late 30s probably. And your 40s will be your peak years of productivity. I'm not making these numbers up, by the way. There have been lots of studies done of when people have achieved their greatest achievements in life. And for some professions, it's around 40. For others, the kinds of professions you're more likely to go into, it's during your 40s that you'll be in your peak year. You have plenty of time to reach that, even if you have spent the years from 20 to 25 or whatever doing something else completely, or for that matter, 25 to 28. You have that amount of time, and it's also not wasted. You are going to come to the workplace bringing assets. If you have gone out of the ordinary track and done some of the things I'm talking about, you are going to be bringing assets to a job interview that cannot be matched by a fresh graduate from an undergraduate college. So that's the nature of my advice for how to spend the next 5 or 10 years of your life, which is basically to treat it as a time for becoming expert in who you are. Which will take some time to do. Whether your parents will appreciate this advice is another question. My daughter, all of these things I'm saying to you, I said to my family, my kids around the dinner table, and in this score, they all took my advice, which is one reason I have to travel to see my grandchildren, to Siem Reap and to Bangkok, with my third son being in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. I forgot to tell them to come back. You know, but anyway, my daughter, after she graduated a few years ago, announced to her friends who were all going off to real jobs or to graduate school that she was going to go to Bologna and get a job teaching English and spend a couple of years there. And her friend said, "Well, that sounds really cool, but what do your parents say?" And my daughter said, "In my family, it's practically obligatory." But it's not practically obligatory in a lot of families. I hope you will consider it as a possibility. Your 20s can be transformative, or you can go through them on rails. The danger of going through them on rails is you get stuck in a career that you eventually hate. The advantage of allowing them to be transformative is to have a vocation at the end of that you love. And if you have done that, you will have done half of the two secular things that are necessary for happiness, a satisfying vocation. The other half is finding your soulmate, but that's a topic for another lecture. Thank you very much. I have some time for Q&A, right? You've had a long day, so we won't keep you very long, and I will rely on Josh to let me know when it's time for the last question.
Mr. Murray, thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. My name is Lanson Ho'opai. I'm from Patrick Henry College. I have a little bit of a question regarding your the first part of your speech. Your very interesting political theory on the new upper class. How did your conception of the new upper class interact with Ayn Rand's conception of the self-interested heroic class as she presented in Atlas Shrugged? Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Nietzschean Übermensch, who characterized himself based on intelligence, preferences, and repudiation of traditional class structure?
There is certainly, I'm hesitating because I'm trying to process all the ways that Ayn Rand's view of the upper class is different from. Ayn Rand's view of the upper class was defined in terms of their productivity, the things they did with their lives. And the thing that links the new upper class, as I'm describing it, is a common culture. And so would Ayn Rand's characters all have, in some sense, shared the same values, and to that extent shared a common culture? Yes. But it proceeded from a set of philosophical principles, whereas the new upper class that I'm describing has been socialized in a lot of cultural norms that I don't think are the same as what Ayn Rand had in mind. What does kind of scare me among some members of the new upper class is that they are perfectly happy thinking of themselves as uber whatevers. That's very un-American. Very un-American. Historically in America, when you were successful, you very much were taking an aw shucks, I'm just an ordinary person kind of attitude. And in fact, oftentimes you deliberately avoided flamboyant, conspicuous consumption because that would set you apart too much. I have been spoken to audiences about coming apart that were, say, comprised of hedge fund managers who have no problem thinking of themselves as the new upper class and are mystified by the ways in which I want them to become more integrated with the rest of society. So that does happen.
Jerome McCollum, Seattle Pacific University. Could you talk a little bit more about the awkwardness of going to Thailand and overcoming that?
It's a pretty standard culture shock thing in terms of the experience of it, except that it's hard to convey how powerful it is. After I'd been in Thailand the first few months, well, I remember this. I was posted to a small northern city, a town really, and I remember being exhausted at the end of every day, partly trying to understand people, just because my Thai at that point was still very bad, but also just it's exhausting to walk down a street and not understand all the social cues going on around you. just exhausting. Plus, it turns out that I didn't like the food as much as I expected to, because, you know, I'd always considered myself to just like everything. And, well, Thai food, real Thai food, as opposed to the Thai food you would get in a lot of Thai restaurants here in the States, Thai food is pretty exotic tasting. So anyway, there was a fellow Peace Corps volunteer in another town who was in a terrible traffic accident and was in traction and broke, you know, a couple of legs, really bad accident. And I envied him because he had an honorable excuse to quit. You could quit from Peace Corps anytime, but I needed an honorable reason. That's how miserable I was. And here's the transformation. And it really is, this is why I'm recommending it, because it is so cool. There was a specific day, I was sitting at the back of the pickup truck as we were going out to one of the villages to try to sell the villagers privies, which was my job in Peace Corps. Hard thing to do, too. But anyway, I'm in the back of the pickup truck. We're bouncing along this laterite road, along the rice paddies beside us, and the mist rising up above them, and some smoke from some wood fires, and the sun shining through the mist. All at once, I just had this visceral sensation of, well, this is not so bad. And what had happened was that I had a state change, you know, in chemistry where they talk about something going from a solid to a liquid instantaneously or vice versa. Well, I sort of had a state change. And from then on, it was a grand adventure. But my resilience was tested a lot that first bit. I will also make one other comment about that. My political philosophy, or I should say my public policy philosophy, was decisively shaped by my experiences in Thai villages. Things that I've written about exclusively with regard to America. My deepest understandings, I think, of the way that government interacts with human happiness came from my experiences in Thai villages. So it's really not a waste of time.
Hi, Erin Latar at the Master's College. I had a question. What kind of additional advice would you give to young women looking to throw themselves into an alien environment in light of the common conception that it's dangerous for women to travel alone?
So I'm sorry, when you said throw themselves into a career...
Into an exotic city.
Well, one thing is you do want to choose your country, okay? I mean, there are countries that are lots more dangerous than others, and environments that are lots more dangerous than others. And as the father of 3 daughters, I can think of a lot of places I would not want them to go. On the other hand, there are places where it's not a problem at all. Southeast Asia, where I was, very safe for women as well as for men. And there are lots, that's the place I know best, so I'm not going to make invidious comparisons with other parts of the world. I will simply say that there are lots of places where that is not an issue. But you do want to do your homework before you decide which exotic city you're going to choose.
Joseph Gilligan, Houghton College. I've watched a lot of videos of you talking about socioeconomics, and I've read books such as Going Alone by Robert Putnam. I've even seen a debate between you and Putnam. Both of you always say
that sounds like more than the medium adult dose of Charles Murray. But
both of you always say, always portray the death of the community as a major problem, like you and coming apart and him and Going Alone. And both of you bring some options to the table. Do you think there will be a time when it's irreversible, like the death of the community will be just the death of the community?
Do I think this time is going to be irreversible? The reason it's such a hard question to answer is there are so many forces that are creating the death of community. Some of which seem to me can do away with it completely. Let me take something as simple as the degree to which it's possible, and I'm thinking particularly now of working class males, to pass their time from morning to night entertaining themselves, whether it's with video games or other kinds of things. And the degree to which, when you're 20 years old and you are not ambitious and you don't seem to have a lot of career options, that behaving that way seems to make a lot of sense. And I can, in that sense, I can see us moving into a society in which it looks way too much like Brave New World, where you have one set of people who are productive and do all this stuff, and you got all these others who are sort of wards of the state. Against that is, if you've listened to that much of my stuff, you know that I talk about vocation, family, community, and faith as being the 4 domains in which people achieve lasting satisfactions. And I think we're hardwired that way. I think that's the way human beings are. Well, if that is correct, then things like family and community will not go away. And that we are in the midst right now of a trough, but there will be a rebound. I will briefly add one of my reasons for optimism in that regard. I think the 20th century was in many ways a kind of adolescence for intellectuals. And I use the word adolescence because adolescence is the age at which you discover your parents have been wrong about some things, and you decide that they're wrong about everything. And in the case of intellectuals, you'd had the Enlightenment, which enthroned reason. You had Darwin and evolution. You had Freud and unconscious motivations, that we weren't the rational people we thought we were. We had Einstein and relativity, all of which were kind of body blows to traditional ways of thinking. And intellectuals in the 20th century sort of said, well, our parents were wrong about some of these things, and they must have been wrong about everything. And so they just sort of threw away all of those traditional ways of looking at the world, and in that sense behaved like adolescents. And the good thing about adolescence is that you grow out of it sooner or later, and I think that that's what's been happening. And I think it will manifest itself, and maybe already is manifesting itself, in what will be a resurgence of religion. I think that the human need to think about the meaning of the universe is undeniable. And I think that intellectuals have so successfully not thought about it for so long and have been so dismissive of it for so long. That's the aberration. And that deep human need will reassert itself, and religion will become much more vibrant in 50 years than it is right now. I think the same thing could happen with things like community and family. The family really is the source of deep satisfactions. And if that's the case, it's going to rebound. But you have just gotten an answer which some days I feel one way, and some days I feel the other. I don't know how it's going to come out.
Let's take 2 more questions.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Haley Lockram from Redeemer University College. My question is unfortunately, student debt is a reality for, I can imagine, a lot of us here. And so my question is, how do you go about developing resilience, as you're talking about, in light of that? Because sometimes those, like going to an exotic city and working isn't an option whilst having to worry about debt.
Because you have to worry about debt. Good question. You have to accommodate yourself accordingly. That's just the reality. In doing so, you still have options. And in a lot of ways, paying off that debt, some of the jobs that I described that would be a whole lot more interesting than the jobs you've been socialized into thinking about, you're still perfectly free to explore the different kinds of itches that need scratching and think of ways to make a living that are more interesting than ones you've thought of before. You simply don't have the option of a lot of time to explore. And that's the reality. I will say this, that the reality of having to deal with debt and having to pay bills That's a stressor in itself. You are not avoiding stress when you are put in that kind of situation. So your resilience will be strengthened considerably by the experience, although maybe not in ways which are as much fun as the ones I was describing. Okay, last question of the evening, which will of course be one that takes me 25 minutes to answer. That's the way it always is with final questions. Now I've made everybody scared to ask the final question.
Hello, Maria Gowan from Hope College. And you speak of being able to have experiences that allow you to escape from the confines of a privileged lifestyle. However, I wanted to ask whether or not just the very fact and the availability of the experiences are more reflective of the fact that one has an upper class and privileged lifestyle by which you can experience a real job or a new country and not have to worry about security. And so is it then truly formative of character and resilience?
There is no way to fake it. There is no, well, I'll tell you, I'll put it this way. There is no way if, let's say, your parents, maybe they aren't rich, but they have enough money, there is no way you can ever fake the stark experience of other people whereby if they run out of money, there's no backstop. There's no calling home and saying, Dad, can you send me a check for $500 to cover my rent? So in that sense, you're absolutely right. It is not as profound an experience if you're coming from a privileged family. I have a friend who is literally a billionaire. They have the private jet, and they have the yacht, and the rest of it. And his wife conscientiously puts on the refrigerator door chores that the kids have to do and all that sort of thing. There's no way that they can make those chores meaningful in the same way that chores are meaningful in a farm family where the cow does have to get milked and the chickens do have to get fed and the rest of that. All of that is true. However, your self-discipline can go a long way toward making the experience authentic. You move out of the house, you say to yourself, I will not ask Dad for that check no matter what. You throw yourself into a situation where you have to pay the rent. In some sense, it has been artificial. But I want to tell you, it feels very real if, in a psychological sense, going to your parents is not an option. So, might be second best in that regard. You can still make it pretty real. I've really enjoyed talking to this kind of audience, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you again.